Hey folks, it's Friday, so once again we're going to go through Johan's replies to the latest dev diary for EU5. I will say Johan actually got some help from St. Dave UK and Pavia once again, as he is technically on vacation, but you know, it's Johan, so he couldn't help giving some answers as well, as he always does. So we're going to go through the questions I've picked out. There were a lot of questions this week, but once again, similar to recently, a lot of them were around the same thing, a lot about like technicalities on which realms had which laws, a lot of questions about Scotland. I don't know, I'm going to have to look into that. I never realised Scottish laws were that interesting, but I suppose they must have been. So I'm actually going to read into that because it did sound pretty interesting from what people were saying, but it wasn't really anything concrete that like I thought was worth adding on here. But if you are interested, obviously I will leave a link to this in the description down below so you can read through the dev diary if you missed it. And then you can also read through Johan's and the other developers' replies. But let's just get straight into it. I shouldn't keep you that long in this video. Like I say, wasn't that many like special questions that really kind of stood out, but we're going to get to them right away. So the first question was by Vector the Great. Will there be an EU4 style mission system or more like the Hoi 4 style focus system? I think this was answered previously. It vaguely rings a bell. I know we're only 18 dev diaries in, but some of them do kind of blur together in my mind already. And that's before we get to what, like 50 of these before the game actually launches. But Johan's reply, which like I say, I think he's given before, is that it's going to be similar to Imperator Rome's, which was a 2.0 hybrid of those two previous systems. And it really was. If you never played Imperator Rome, it had a mission tree system a little bit like EU4. It looked like EU4 in many ways, but it was a lot more, I don't know, contextual, I guess you could say, where you could pick one option and that would actually close off the other option. So it would be, say, if you were in Gaul, one might be like invade Iberia. The other side of it might have been something like make peace with people in Iberia. And depending on which one you went down, it actually closed off the other one so you couldn't go down it. So I guess we're going to get some kind of hybrid system again, or just building up on that system. I wonder if it's going to work where it's going to even further loosen the kind of like pigeonholing of nations in a certain way. This is one of the bits of feedback I've always given about EU4, is that to get the most out of a certain country, you didn't have to do the mission trees, but the bonuses were so good. It was kind of silly not to. Obviously, you could just ignore them. You could play Portugal as like a huge European land power, just try take over everything, and ignore the colonial and trade aspects. But it wasn't really the theme of the country or how the game was going to play it in many respects. It was kind of weird to do that. Same with England. A lot of its mission tree bonuses were focused in a certain area, and you could go outside of those, but again, you're missing so many bonuses. A lot of people probably just play the game as the mission trees are laid out for the most part, especially for the countries that are very focused on those mission trees. I wonder if in EU5 they're going to loosen it a little bit more, so maybe you could have somewhere like Portugal, and their tree does have like a historical version of it, but then maybe not like an alt history, but some way that you can split it out and do a different track for Portugal. So maybe you start colonizing in the north of America, maybe you do become like a big internal European power, maybe take over Spain, go into France, spread from the west of Europe into it, or maybe go down into Africa or something like that. Maybe they're going to have these contextual mission trees that if you go outside of the historical ones, it like auto-generate a mission tree for you, which again is very similar how it worked in Imperator. You had mission trees for every nation you could play as, and in that game, there were a lot of nations, I guess you could call them, little kind of groups of people that you could play as. And then mission tree system meant that even if it was like a generic nation that really was just a name, and outside of that nothing special, it still had these trees where you could not like specialize them, but it felt like you were playing a nation with a mission tree and not just a super generic mission tree, even though it really was for those ones, but just like how it worked with the different tracks you could go down, and it kind of themed around where you were. So if you were like a county in Brittany, maybe you would have a track that would be like, you know, conquer Brittany, and then it would continue into conquer Gaul or something like that. And if you played as another tribe in another part of France, maybe it would be conquer Normandy and then carry on into conquer Gaul or something like that. But with that long-winded explanation ended, let me know what you think in the comments down below. How do you want the mission trees to work? I would like that system where there is like a few historical tracks on the mission tree, and then the other ones are just contextual as to what you're doing. So again, if you're Portugal, if you're going into Spain, maybe once you've gained enough of Spain, it triggers a mission tree that's all about ending the conquering of Spain and then maybe unifying it, converting it, something like that. And then you would get another tree that maybe popped out and said like, okay, let's continue our advancement into France or something like that. Let me know what you think. I think something like that would be a cool idea, not having these fully rigid trees that you kind of play towards Otherwise, really, why are you playing that country outside of the name of it? But like I say, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let's get on to the next one, though. How much flavor do you currently have for laws? Can I have a rough estimate? And the reply here was just semi-lots, which did make me laugh. We've got semi-lots amount of flavor in the system. They have said elsewhere in a few of the other questions that they are going to have it flavored around different regions. So I think if like Sweden has a special name for its parliament, for example, it is going to have that name in the game. It's not just going to be called Parliament wherever it is. It is going to have those localized names if they existed. In the next question, they were a little bit concerned about how the noble levies law would affect gameplay due to the fact that nobles don't naturally grow. They are only made available by people promoting out of the lower ranks. And the reply here, again, a little bit tongue-in-cheek like the last one, Agincourt had no impact whatsoever on the French nobility, of course. Which again, you know, this is what happened. The nobility went into these wars. A bunch of them died when it didn't go well. And then that created a vacuum in those countries, and other people had to fill that vacuum. And that's pretty much how it worked historically. Obviously, this is a video game. I think sometimes people forget that, especially with some of the replies I see about, well, this country had this law, this border's not exactly where I think it should be. Like, they're doing their best, guys, with a lot of these things. And there's a lot of things that just don't make sense for video games, or that it's just so much work that the game would ultimately just never come out if they wanted to build it like exactly like it was in history. They're doing their best. And I think this is a good example of this. Like, look, this is what happened historically. There were battles where an entire roster of people from the nobility just died in a battle. And then, of course, what happened? Well, it didn't just spawn 100 new nobles, did it, out of the air? You know, they had to be refilled naturally by people moving up ranks, other nobles, I guess, moving into their position, all these kind of things. And that's really kind of even maybe semi-abstracted how the game is going to work. And I think that's a good reply there. I think it does call out, look, this did happen historically. Is it going to happen more than it did historically? Probably. But at the end of the day, I'd rather have it work this way than it just being like nobodies in the army that you don't really care about. And the next question, will it be possible to create your own religions like the English did with Anglican? And the answer is just no. They're just going to have historical religions. I would imagine mods will be able to do this. Like, you'll be able to make your own religions in mods and things. But the actual game itself, you are going to have just the set religions that existed. I think it's just easier for them to kind of play out the campaign in the timelines and how the game is going to play if they have set things in some areas, especially with how they're wanting to kind of tell the story through the game. I think it makes sense that they are locked off, but again, I'm sure with mods you will be able to do it, so it's nothing too crazy. That's the thing with a lot of these things where it's like, nope, we're not going to add this, or that isn't how this thing is going to work. At the end of the day, they've already said the game is very moddable, so you can just do this through mods. You're not really losing the ability to do this, it just won't be built into the game itself. In the next question, of course, the Spanish Inquisition. It was going to come up at some point, and this person was asking, can we have the Inquisition as part of the religious laws? And the reply was yes, there is going to be an Inquisition law. They went off and checked the script. There are 5 policies within this law, of which some are common to all Catholic countries, and some unique, of course, the Spanish Inquisition, as everyone expected. So it looks like, yeah, you can have an Inquisition law and you can set it as to like how you're going to interact with that, how you're going to implement that. And of course, the Spanish are going to get some flavor around that for the historical, you know, well-known version that they did. So we are already seeing how these little bits of flavor are getting sprinkled around these different systems. In the next question, will we get some version of the laws of the Indies that the Spanish crown created for governing its colonies outside of Europe? And the answer is just yes, we are going to get that. We are going to get it where you can set laws in your homeland, I guess, and then for New World colonies, all these different colonies you set up, you actually can set up individual laws for those by the looks of it. So that's pretty cool. That is, as this person says, historically how it happened. And it looks like we are getting a version of that in the game as well. And if you do remember, Johan said colonization dev diary is going to be September, I think he said. So we've got a little bit of time to wait for that, but we are going to get that before the year ends and getting to see exactly how the colonization system is going to work. Well, actually 3 questions here, so we'll go through them one at a time. Can laws be forced through by estates if they are powerful enough or unhappy enough? If they are powerful enough, yes. So you can have estates, if they're really high in power, actually just implementing laws on you. Well, not on you, again. You're not playing as the king, you're playing as the country, but you know what I mean. Can a law change cause revolts that want to change it back to the previous one? You see this a lot in Crusader Kings with like your crown authority. If you up it a tier, you generally will get a rebellion or a scheme to try push it back down a level. And the answer is no, but it is something that they are thinking of doing. I think we will get a version of this where you get some pushback, especially if you're not kind of a powerful king, I guess. If you have low stability, I wonder if that would cause something like this to occur. And then the last one, can I force law changes through war, like abolishing slavery or ending serfdom? And they actually say this is a good idea. They haven't thought about it yet, but it is something they could add into the later stages of the game, and I think this would be a pretty cool addition. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I think it would be cool and some interesting gameplay if you could go to war to abolish slavery somewhere. You know, you could play one where you're trying to liberate all the slaves or whatever, and you can go to war and say, you know, I'm forcing you to abolish slavery. Or even just like you go to war with somebody and then it is one of the options you can choose at the end. You know, I'm going to take this land and I'm going to force you to abolish slavery at the same time. Or again, as they say here, ending serfdom. There's a bunch of things you could do with this where you could try push through things. Maybe even like you could push through empowering the parliament or something weird like that. I'm sure again there'll be a mod or something that allows you to do that, but being able to push through these like law or policy changes through warfare or some other means, I think is an interesting way to kind of tie the different areas of the game together, I think. In the next question, how much of an abstraction are parliaments? If I'm playing as the Emperor of China, the Son of Heaven certainly didn't bow to anybody such as this, and the reply is that not all countries have parliaments. Now, this was one of the things we talked about on Wednesday, because it sounded like you always had a parliament or some version of it, but it does look like that isn't the case. It's only going to be in certain places. I imagine a lot of places, especially in Europe, but outside of that, it looks like we're going to have some other system that I guess gives the same, not like gameplay, I guess, as Parliament's been in there, but there must be some way to get other people to help you implement changes to laws and policies outside of the Parliament if the Parliament doesn't exist. Maybe you have some other mechanic that helps you in that way. Or again, here, if you're the Emperor, I guess maybe you don't have that. You're like, I'm the Emperor of China. I do what I want, thank you very much. I don't need to ask other people to help me to do things. So that could be also how that works. In the next question, they notice the allowed estates nobility under the succession law that was in the dev diary. Does that mean characters belong to specific estates? And the answer is yes, each character belongs to an estate. So yes, every character you see in the game is going to be associated with one of these, most likely probably the nobility for most characters, but then you are going to have burgher characters, and then, you know, your generals and your admirals, I guess they'll all be linked into one of these as well. And I'm sure there's going to be some mechanics around how that benefits certain characters. Would you want a noble as an admiral or something like that? We'll see in the future, I'm sure, when we get to like the warfare dev diaries, how that is going to make some difference, because I'm sure it must do. If all characters are tied to a specific estate, there must be some other system that uses that to an advantage or disadvantage depending on where they're from. In the next one, can I know the PC requirements for this game, or is it too early? It's too early. I know pretty much every time I do a video, somebody will always say, the game's going to run terrible, this game's going to be awful, look at all the population, that's going to make the game run slow. Now, that could be the case, but as I've mentioned in previous videos, Johan has said that the game is in a good state at the moment, where it runs pretty well, even at the end of the game, when there's a lot of population. Obviously, we've only got to take his word for it, but I can't see why he'd lie about it. He would just say, I think that there is room for improvement, that they are still early in development, and they're going to do a lot of optimization before launch. Obviously, would we believe him with other Paradox games? You know, that's up to you. I'm not going to tell you how to feel about it. I'm not too surprised they haven't told us PC requirements. We won't get that information until much nearer launch. Probably not even at the announcement of the game. Probably much closer to launch will get PC requirements when they finally finished with as much optimization as they can do. I would imagine if your PC can run something like Hoi 4, Victoria 3 especially, Crusader Kings, if you can run those without any issue, I would imagine you'd be able to run this with no issue. The next question, begging Johan for an answer here, is there an option to have the name of the Overlord sprawl over the subjects like in CK2? So this is where you would have subject nations, and if you're France, your name would cover them, so it kind of like looked like you owned that whole section of the map and not just France, and then like your subject nations around it keeping their own names and making it look, I guess, like you don't kind of control as much land as you do. I can kind of see why people want this. It doesn't bother me personally, but I know some people want it to look cool with just like huge France across the whole map if you own technically the whole map through all your subjects and things. And Johan's saying it's doable, but I guess it's not really on the list for them to do. Again, I'm sure maybe a mod could do this, or I would think that maybe he will add this as an option later on. The next question, this was around the fact that when you change policies, they're not enacted immediately. Well, they are enacted, but they take time to implement. So you can enact a policy, and then it might take 2 years for it to fully take effect in your realm. And this person, Raccoon City, just saying that this is an awesome system, and saying like, oh, the developer that made this is amazing. And I just wanted to call this out because Johan, and I've seen this a few times, not trying to take credit for himself. He's just saying like the team's amazing and that he's always in awe of the content they make, the ideas they think of, and how they want to implement these different systems. It would have been easy for them to just do it the same as EU4, that when you change something, it just immediately happens. And that in EU5, it is going to take that little bit of time to spread out across your realm. So I just wanted to call this one out because, again, Johan just bigging up his team and saying, like, look, it's not just me, guys. Everyone here is doing fantastic work, and I would echo that from what we've seen so far. Now, the next one, not around gameplay itself technically. I wanted to call this out because I think a lot of players, especially people coming into Paradox games, the UI can be very daunting. Like, if you go try and play EU4, it is very daunting to play. Crusader Kings, Victoria, I think the UI has got a lot easier. Now, there were a bunch of questions here about the background and how this would look for colorblind people. And I'll be honest, the developer here came in and said, look, our bad here, really. We don't have anyone that is colorblind on the team. Thanks for kind of calling this out for us. It is something I think they would have got to in the future, but they wanted to take the time to say, thanks for calling this out. We will look at this. We will have some colorblind features before the game comes out to launch. So I just wanted to call this out because there are people out there who are colorblind, obviously, that want to play these games. And with the small UI elements and with the small text and the different colors on different backgrounds, like, I don't have this problem myself, but I'm really happy that the team has seen these questions being called up and saying, like, oh yeah, this is something we need to make sure we do, because we want everyone to enjoy this, you know, no matter if you're a hardcore Paradox player, hardcore Grand Strategy player. At the end of the day, hopefully you're like myself, where I just want everyone to be able to play this game, and lowering that barrier of entry is just something we should all be there for. Just making a good UI, a readable UI, and a UI that everyone can understand, I think is an admirable goal. And then the last one here, I added this because it was a little bit funny, to be honest. That's the only reason why it's here, because Johan was kind of joking throughout this whole thread system that he never says no to ideas, that he's like always saying yes to things. He's never said no to an idea from somebody. He was kind of like half joking around, and then the other developers were coming in and saying, like, no, he does say no. He says no all the time. He's just being nice to us. Like, don't worry about it too much. He obviously doesn't just allow us to do whatever we want. And then this person replied with, like, shouldn't you keep a record so you don't waste everyone's time with repeated requests, saying like, oh, why do you not like note down? So if a developer comes in and says, why do we do this? And you go, no, you could instead say, hey, why don't you just go check that list? Somebody's asked for this before, and you can see if it's a yes or no. And Johan pretty much saying that, like, here, new employee, here's 25,000 pages of rejected design ideas. Please memorize it before suggesting a new idea. But anyway, on that note, we'll leave it there for today. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, hit that like button. It helps other people find the video and the channel in the future. And if you are new here and if you enjoyed it, I'm covering EU5 through the Tinto Talks Dev Diaries up to official announcement, launch, and much, much further than that. And I also cover Crusader Kings in a similar manner. If you have listened to my voice rambling on for the last 15 to 20 minutes, you can follow along, subscribe, and as I said, I cover Crusader Kings, other historical strategy games as well. But we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you in the next one.